Most fantasy managers will look at the final stat line. They're going to see 300 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 25 fantasy points. Immediately, they're going to think, wow, that quarterback played great. But fantasy football has a dangerous problem. The box score does not tell you how those points were created. Okay? Some quarterbacks will create fantasy points because they controlled the game. Other fantasy quarterbacks lost control of it early. Once defenses go prevent, teams start protecting leads. Once the volume spikes late, fantasy football can start lying to you. Welcome to the War Room. This is the Front Office Podcast. I am your host, Pistols, and I bring you our fantasy reality check. Garbage time is lying to you. And here's why. Thank you for joining me on this episode. We're going to go over why garbage time is just unreliable. Basically lies to you week in and week out. Fantasy football has trained people to chase the final score. They look at the final score and go, wow, that was either a high scoring game. My guys probably did really well, blah, blah, blah. Nobody ever asks, how were these fantasy points created? They just see the total. They see the quarterback finishes QB7 on the week. People will immediately say, oh my God, there's an elite upside. He's a league winner. He's a stable starter. I can start him every week. He's a breakout candidate, this and that, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually watch the game, a lot of these performances they look completely different. Okay. The offense stalls early, quarterback struggles early, the team falls behind. Then suddenly, all of a sudden, miraculously, in the fourth quarter, the passing volume goes up. The defense is softened. Underneath throws open up. Prevent defense starts. Guys are just open all over the field. Now, the stat line looks a little bit more respectable. It does. It looks a little bit more respectable in this garbage time. Fantasy managers all over will call that consistency. Okay? That isn't offensive control. That's the reactive production on what is happening in the game flow. Those are two very different terms. Reactive and proactive, okay? The fantasy reality check of it is here's what they don't want to hear. Here's what managers don't ever want to hear. And I apologize, I'm on a different setup. I promise my eyes are here, but I'm trying to make sure everything's going smooth. Here's what fantasy managers don't want to hear, okay? Garbage time can create a fake fantasy stability. A quarterback can struggle for 3 quarters, fail in the red zone, lose the offensive rhythm, create zero pressure on the defense. But still, they'll finish with 20 plus fantasy points. That doesn't mean the offense was healthy by any means. It means the volume inflated late. And when the volume inflates late, it creates this false sense of hope that you have finally found a quarterback that you can start every single week. Once fantasy managers start relying on those inflated finishes, they start overdrafting unstable environments. That's where the fantasy mistakes will happen, because eventually what's going to happen is teams are going to figure it out. The passing attempts are going to disappear. The comeback script disappears. The defense softness disappears. And now the fantasy floor collapses. This is why fantasy production without context is very, very dangerous. Stats alone can hide offensive instability, coaching problems, target volatility, quarterback inconsistency. But that's why here on the Front Office, we focus on the structure and not just the numbers. We want to have a stable environment to where you know you're going to get a certain amount of points every single week. That is what is going to win you your league. This is exactly why some quarterbacks stayed lower in my tier list. If you went back, go over Pistols Live HQ on YouTube, look at my quarterback tier list, tell me what you think, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. The fantasy points alone are not enough. Just them by themselves is not enough. Quarterback can score fantasy points without actually controlling the fantasy environment. Quarterbacks that can constantly explode late in games, the fantasy finish looks fantastic. But the reality is the offense lacked control. The defense dictated the game flow. The volume became reactive instead of proactive. And those are those two terms that I told you that are very, very different, obviously. Not just because they're two different words, but they mean very, very different things in fantasy football. But that's what matters, because the best fantasy quarterbacks don't need garbage time. They create pressure immediately. Those are my tier 1 guys: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. These guys control the game the minute they step on the field. These are the quarterbacks that bend the environment around them. The offense doesn't wait until the fourth quarter to function, and that's the difference between production and control. And once you can understand that distinction, fantasy football starts making a lot more sense. Okay? The real fantasy impact here, it changes how you draft quarterbacks. It changes how you evaluate offenses. And honestly, it changes how you watch football. I know for me, I've been doing fantasy football for 20 years. Coming up on 20 years, actually, I should say. And yes, I am a diehard Bills fan. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, but I am a huge Bills fan. I love Josh Allen. I love what the offense does on a weekly basis. But being a fantasy football player helps me not only follow the rest of the league, but understand how offenses are built and the structure around them. And every single offense is completely different, which to me makes the games just so much better, and it's such a better watch. Basically, you stop asking how many fantasy points did he score. That's the normal question. How many points did my guy get? How many points did he get? How many points did this person get? That person. But you have to start asking yourself, how did the offense function? How were those points generated? That question means way more, and that matters way more in fantasy football. Fantasy managers constantly chase fake consistency, inflated volume, misleading finishes, instead of chasing the offensive control, the stable ecosystem, and the proactive production. This is how fantasy managers end up trapped, and the box score told them that the quarterback was safe. The structure says otherwise. Looking at the structure of a team will tell you everything you need to know about that player. Obviously the reason I bring up the quarterbacks is because garbage time revolves around them, because if the quarterback's not playing well, nobody else on the team is playing well either, so your points are probably on the lower side. But the front office take, fantasy points are not always created equally. Some quarterbacks will create the fantasy production because they controlled the game. Others create it because they lost control of the game early. If you can't identify the difference between the two, fantasy football will continue to lie to you. It will continue to tell you that your quarterback is safe or your wide receiver is safe without actually understanding what's going on around them, to where you need to create a true consistency. A quarterback that controls the game the minute he steps on the field. This is exactly why the fantasy reality check exists. We're not arguing rankings. We're not chasing hot takes or anything like that. It's mainly here to help you understand what is actually creating the fantasy production. Once you understand the structure, you stop reacting, you start preparing. Prepare now, win later. Thank you guys. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate your attendance here on the Fantasy Reality Check. I'm your host, Pistols. I appreciate you for being here in the war room with me. That is another episode of the Front Office Podcast. I will catch you guys next time. Peace out.